Hey there. Today we're diving into a question that can feel really personal, maybe even a little awkward. Why exactly does the Catholic Church have this specific rule about who can receive Holy Communion? It's something a lot of us have probably wondered about, so let's get into it.
So picture this. You're at a wedding for a good friend, or maybe a funeral for a relative. It's this beautiful, solemn Catholic Mass. And then, just before it's time for communion, the priest gets up and makes an announcement that just feels, well, a little strange. He says something like, "For our friends from other faiths, we ask that you not receive communion, but we invite you to come forward for a blessing." And if you're not Catholic, you're probably sitting there thinking, wait a minute, am I being left out? I thought church was supposed to be welcoming. It's a totally normal reaction, and it can be really confusing. And look, it absolutely can feel unwelcoming, but the reason behind it isn't about pushing people away. It's actually rooted in these really deep beliefs about unity, about honesty, and about a tradition that goes back 2,000 years. So let's unpack what's really going on. Okay, so before we jump into the why, let's make sure we're all on the same page about the what. What is this rule we're actually talking about? The practice is officially called closed communion, and what that means is the Church reserves the Eucharist for baptized Catholics who are properly prepared and in full communion with the Church. Now, those two little phrases, properly prepared and full communion, they're actually the keys to understanding this whole thing. All right, so why this rule? It really boils down to two huge reasons, and they're totally connected. The first is about what Catholics believe communion actually is, and the second is about what it means when you receive it. This is the absolute heart of the matter. For many of our Protestant brothers and sisters, the bread and wine are a sacred and powerful symbol of what Jesus did on the cross. But for Catholics, the belief is different in a fundamental way. They believe that through a process called transubstantiation, the bread and wine become the actual body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. It's not just a symbol, it is the real presence. And that is pillar number one. And pillar number two flows right out of that first one. Because of this profound belief, the act of receiving communion is seen as the ultimate sign of unity. It's an outward expression that everyone there shares this oneness of faith, life, and worship. The word communion itself literally means union with. So this is the crucial part. When a person gets up, walks down the aisle, and receives the Eucharist, they're making a public statement with their body. That action is saying, without words, I am in full communion. I believe everything the Catholic Church teaches, not just about the Eucharist, but everything. And this quote just nails the pastoral reason behind it all. The Church doesn't want to put you, as a visitor, in a position where your actions don't match up with what you honestly believe. If you don't believe everything the Church teaches, then receiving communion would basically be telling a lie with your action. So the rule isn't meant to push you away. It's meant to respect your own personal integrity. You know, friends don't invite friends to lie. And this isn't some rule the Church made up in the Middle Ages. They point directly back to the Bible, specifically to what St. Paul wrote as the foundation for this entire practice. Let's see what he had to say. So first, in his letter to the Corinthians, Paul sets the stage. He says, hey, because we all share in this one bread, the Eucharist, that's what makes us one body. He's saying the act itself is the sign of their unity. The act and the belief are one and the same. But then, whoa, just a chapter later, Paul gives this incredibly serious warning. He says that if you receive in an unworthy manner, which the Church understands as receiving without the right belief or without being spiritually ready, you're actually profaning the body and blood of Jesus. He says that if you don't discern the body, meaning if you don't recognize what it truly is, you're bringing judgment on yourself. This is seen as a matter of serious spiritual safety. And the very first Christians took this warning to heart. There's this ancient Christian text from the 1st century called the Didache. It's one of the oldest Christian writings we have outside of the New Testament. And in it, it clearly says that only those baptized into the faith could receive the Eucharist. So this shows that right from the beginning, communion was reserved for those who were in full community. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but are there ever any exceptions to this rule? Like, ever? And the answer is yes, but they're very specific and very rare. The Church actually has a whole legal framework for this stuff called the Code of Canon Law. And one specific rule, Canon 844, lays out the very few extraordinary situations where a non-Catholic Christian might be able to receive communion. And the rules here are super specific. For members of the Eastern Orthodox churches, who the Catholic Church recognizes as having the same belief about the Eucharist, it's a bit more straightforward. If they ask for it, they can often receive. But for Protestants, it's a much higher bar because of that difference in belief. It's usually only in a situation like danger of death. And even then, they have to ask for it themselves, and, this is the absolute key, they must profess the very same belief in the real presence that Catholics hold. So, hearing all of this might naturally lead to a much bigger and way more personal question. If the Eucharist is this important, what does this rule say about the salvation of people who aren't Catholic?
Let's just ask the question directly. Does the Catholic Church teach that if you're not Catholic and you can't receive communion, you can't be saved? This is a huge concern, and it deserves a straight answer.
And the answer, directly from Catholic teaching, is a clear no. This rule about communion is not a judgment about who goes to heaven. The Church is very clear that salvation is possible for people outside of its visible structure. So how does the Church square that circle? On one hand, you have Jesus in the Gospel of John saying, "Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you." That makes the Eucharist sound absolutely necessary. But on the other hand, the Church holds that non-Catholics can be saved. The key distinction it makes comes down to knowledge and intent. The teaching is that someone who knows the Church is necessary but willfully rejects it is putting their salvation in jeopardy. That's very, very different from someone who, through no fault of their own, isn't part of the Catholic Church. So, to bring it all home, this rule about communion isn't a judgment on you. It's not a statement about your goodness, your relationship with God, or where you'll spend eternity. It's a rule that's really about protecting the integrity of the belief and, frankly, the spiritual safety of the person, making sure that this incredibly profound act of belief is also a profoundly honest one.
And that kind of leaves us with one final thought to chew on. We often think of sharing a meal as the way we create community. It's a tool for hospitality. But what if, as Catholics believe, communion isn't the start of unity, but the sign that unity is already complete? How does that change our whole perspective on what it means to believe and what it truly means to belong?